Am I Indian? Absolutely, I'm Indian. I'm a whole Cherokee Indian. That's what we are. All of your black people are the Indians. All of us, without exception.
What if everything you've been told about your ancestry was a lie? Imagine growing up with a family secret that your people never came from Africa at all, but are in fact the true indigenous inhabitants of North America. For some African American families, this is not just a wild idea, but an article of faith whispered at kitchen tables. The story goes, our ancestors were the original people of this land, erased from history and mislabeled. It's a powerful, provocative thought. But where did it come from, and is there any truth to it? In this documentary, we explore the roots of this belief, the evidence of history and science, and what it reveals about identity, belonging, and the real fight for justice.
We're not from Africa, we are natives. This our land, we don't know about the slave ships. We're not from Africa, we indigenous. I need you to listen, I need you to be getting this. We not black, we not black. Know your story, family history, that's stats. We not black, that's a curse. Let's put this curse to rest and be blessed, yes.
It is an insult. We're the Native Americans here.
Instead of being called African American, what would you prefer?
Native American. Because we are the natives here. And they've gotten us to believe that we're from somewhere else.
How about the Indians, the native Indian? Do you regard them as natives too, or you're more native than them?
We're more native than them.
Interesting.
From an early age, many African Americans learned that our ancestors were kidnapped from Africa and brought to these shores in chains. Yet in hundreds of families, a different story has taken root. Grandparents or elders sometimes confide, we are Creeks or we're Black Irish, tales that diverge sharply from textbooks. These oral traditions flourish in the gaps of written history. When slavery and Jim Crow erased records or obscured lineage, stories passed down by word of mouth became the only link to the past. Mistrust in official narratives also feeds these myths. Centuries of oppression have shown black people that history is often written by the victors. If U.S. textbooks once minimized African civilizations or glorified slaveholders, why believe them now? So some conclude the true story of their people must be something grander. These family legends, whether of lost African kingdoms, Egyptian pharaohs, or native tribes, serve as defiance and self-respect in the face of injustice. They feel right, even if hard to verify. In many cases, they may be symbolic, a way to claim a deep-rooted history in America or to assert pride. But as we will see, symbolism and factual lineage are not the same, and mixing the two has real consequences.
I got my ancestry DNA results back. And let me tell you, I've been told my entire life by my family that we were Native American. Probably slaves to Native American. That's why they thought we were Native American. Cause I got my results back. And let me tell you. 48% Nigeria, 18% Congo, Cameroon, Western Bantu people, 10% Mali, 8% Benin and Togo, 5% Ivory Coast and Ghana, 5% Scotland, 2% Wales, 2% England and Northern Europe, 1% Sweden, 1% Spain. So basically, I'm just a typical American.
Today, historians and scientists can map our origins far more precisely than ever. The hard evidence shows that nearly all African Americans are overwhelmingly descended from West African peoples. Records of the transatlantic slave trade tally over 9 million Africans brought to the Americas, mostly from West and West Central Africa, between the 1500s and 1800s. Modern genetics confirm this picture. A major DNA study found the average African American genome is about 73% African, mostly West African, 24% European, and less than 1% Native American. In other words, for nearly every African American today, the bloodlines trace back to African homelands, with smaller fractions of European ancestry from the slave era. At the same time, there were real cases of African Native American intermixing in early America, but they account for only a tiny fraction of our history. For example, in the 1700s to 1800s, a community known as the Black Seminoles formed in Florida. These were escaped slaves, Maroons, and free blacks who joined forces with the Seminole Native tribe. They intermarried and fought together against U.S. forces. Likewise, after the Civil War, several tribes, Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, Choctaw, and Chickasaw, among others, had sizable populations of African-descended people, the descendants of slaves owned by tribal members. In fact, the 1866 U.S. Creek Treaty explicitly acknowledges persons of African descent living among the Creeks, granting them full citizenship rights alongside native Creeks. These historical nuances gave rise to the freedmen cases, Creek and Cherokee freedmen seeking tribal citizenship today. Even so, these instances were the exception, not the rule. U.S. Census data reflect how uncommon African native ancestry is. In 2010, only about 182,000 Americans identified as both African American and Native American, and another 112,000 as African, Native, and white combined. That's under 300,000 people, out of over 42 million self-identified African Americans, well under 1%. In practice then, stories of deep indigenous roots usually stem from small bits of history or family lore, rather than an entire people. These examples show that African and Native American heritages did intertwine in our past, but on a limited scale. Meanwhile, the overwhelming majority of African American heritage, even for those who look different, is African. Oral histories can conflate personal meaning with literal fact. Saying I'm Cherokee might really mean I feel as much a part of this land as anyone, or my roots here are deep, rather than precise ethnic lineage. In fact, anthropology notes that family stories often represent symbolic truths rather than strict genealogy. It's natural to take pride in these stories, but DNA and documents point to West Africa for most African Americans. In the 20th century, some writers went even further, positing that entire advanced civilizations in the Americas were founded by African explorers, effectively rewriting history. A famous example is Ivan van Sertima, a Guyanese-American scholar who, in the 1976 book They Came Before Columbus, argued that Africans crossed the Atlantic long before Columbus. Van Sertima suggested African contact influenced the Olmec, Maya, and other Mesoamerican cultures. The book became a bestseller in African American circles and inspired many Afrocentric narratives. Its dramatic stories like African pharaohs appearing as Aztec gods captured imaginations and countered the notion that Black people had no ancient history in the Americas.
Recently, yesterday in fact, just before I came here, the New York Times brought out a startling article showing that the Africans had entered the domestication of cattle in East Africa 7,000 years before it occurred anywhere else in the world. And this is one of the bases. This is one of the bases of civilization. So that you have to look again at the African. It is because the capacity of the African, the potential of the African, has been reduced in our imagination and our consciousness by these studies of primitives that we do not realize that the African was involved in things that are just as important, just as significant, and in some areas even more significant than what was happening in Europe before the Industrial Revolution.
However, mainstream scholarship has firmly rejected these claims. Archaeologists and anthropologists note that Van Sertima's evidence sculpture faces, legends, artifact comparisons doesn't hold up. In fact, experts say his thesis was largely ignored or dismissed by academic peers. His work has been labeled pseudoarchaeology, criticized for robbing credit from Native American achievements. A detailed 1997 review in Current Anthropology found no archaeological proof of African voyages to the New World. It concluded Van Sertima's proposals were without foundation. In short, no genuine African artifacts have been reliably uncovered in pre-Columbian America. That hasn't stopped some from clinging to Afrocentric legends. Fueled by a desire for a proud heritage, others have floated theories of Egyptian or Carthaginian visits, lost tribes of Ethiopia, or even Black mound builder cultures in North America. These ideas resonate emotionally. They celebrate African ingenuity and flip a Eurocentric narrative, but historians warn that substituting myth for fact does a disservice. It replaces one erasure with another, often overshadowing the real histories of Native Americans. As one summary puts it, Van Sertima's theories ultimately serve to portray native civilizations as incapable of their own achievements without African intervention. In the end, the academic consensus is clear. There is no credible evidence of large-scale African settlement in the Americas before 1492. The theories remain in the realm of speculation and identity politics. Yet understanding why these ideas spread is important. They shine a light on the hunger for a dignified origin story and on how facts, if unexamined, can become tales of hurt and hope. Why would anyone deny African roots and claim to be native to America? The answer often lies in identity and belonging. After generations of slavery, segregation, and being told of a homeland on another continent, it's natural to long for a deeper claim to this land. Claiming indigenous ancestry can feel like a rightful stake in America, a declaration that this is my country too. In this sense, the belief is not really about DNA, it's about feeling native to a place where one has lived for centuries. But identity is also political, and here the story gets messy. In recent years, movements like ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery, and FBA, Foundational Black Americans, have drawn hard lines around who counts as truly Black American. They emphasize lineage above all, A DOS leaders explicitly focus on descendants of U.S. slaves, often excluding African or Caribbean-born black people from their definition of community. FBA advocates similarly define black Americans as those whose ancestors were enslaved here in the U.S. only. In effect, they mirror nativist rhetoric by saying, if your family came from outside after 1865, you don't qualify as African American. This means an African immigrant who's lived here for decades might be considered less legitimate than a family in Alabama since 1700. These identity debates have quickly become contentious. DOS organizers have publicly discredited prominent black figures for not meeting their lineage criteria. For instance, they questioned the Americanness of a politician whose parents immigrated, even claiming she wasn't really black enough to address black issues. Foundational black Americans likewise draw a sharp line. They explicitly say reparations or resources should go only to those with direct slave ancestry in the U.S., not to more recent arrivals. Critics warn that such politics of difference only undermine unity. As one scholar observes of ADOS, by foregrounding lineage, they distinguish themselves from black immigrants, pushing an exceptional and narrow vision of black identity. Others see it as a classic trap set by white supremacy. Keep the community fighting over authenticity so we never unite against oppression. Indeed, there is a long history of external forces pitting black people against each other, whether it was 19th century European settlers manipulating color-based castes, or later housing and job policies, internal divisions from the house Negro versus field Negro to modern cyber bickering have been amplified by the powerful. As some activists bluntly note, these splits have been a delight to those in the establishment, who thrive on the absence of black unity. In short, debates over who is really African American often tell us more about our fears and alliances than about history. Feeling excluded from one narrative leads some to latch onto another, but both approaches can sow discord. When people start denying each other's heritage, they are rehearsing the same othering that white supremacy has always encouraged, only now it happens within the black community. All of this plays directly into the issue of reparations. For black Americans, reparations discussions hinge on lineage. Historically, promises like 40 acres and a mule were for formerly enslaved families. Today's movements argue they have a birthright to remedies. If African Americans are actually indigenous to this soil, some speculate, could they claim benefits meant for native peoples? On the flip side, if they are of African origin, the claim is grounded in the unique experience of chattel slavery and its aftermath. These disputes matter. For example, descendants of Creek freedmen, Black Creeks, have sued the Creek Nation to restore their citizenship, pointing to treaties that guaranteed tribal rights to former slaves' families. They argue their ancestors were promised the same protections and land as native Creek citizens. Meanwhile, advocates for slavery reparations emphasize that only descendants of enslaved Africans in the U.S. were legally wronged by American institutions, a point illustrated by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, and its ongoing reparations campaign. The NAACP resolution explicitly calls for recognizing that the legal precedent of slavery and Jim Crow created wealth and educational gaps, and that addressing this requires more than mere financial handouts. As one reparations proponent put it, the goal is a national reckoning, more than recompense for past injustices. The danger in mixing these issues is that it can split the movement for justice. If African lineage claims are dismissed in favor of a native ancestry narrative, some fear it undermines the moral case for addressing slavery's legacy. If, on the other hand, anyone with a drop of native blood demands tribal reparations, it could be seen as overreaching and breed resentment. In fact, some leaders argue reparations aren't just about money, they are about acknowledgement of suffering and building solidarity. When people argue instead of unify, they strengthen the very powers that insist we stay apart. Reparations will be granted, if at all, more easily by a united front. History shows us the oppressor's playbook. When marginalized communities argue over identity, the ruling class doesn't lift a finger. Solidarity around shared experiences, economic injustice, police brutality, health disparities is far more powerful than squabbles over ancestry. As one activist explains, reparations should be seen as spiritual renewal for a people, a collective healing, not as a zero-sum competition. In the quest for justice, dividing over who is truly entitled only weakens the call.
Hey, brother, you are African, brother. You lost your African mind, brother. Come back to Africa, brother. And I asked him, motherfucker, have you ever been to Africa? They say no, but it's the motherland. I said, why your ass ain't never been there? Well, I don't know. I'm like, get your delusional ass on. See these people right here? Who do they look like? Don't they look like me and you? You see how they have afros and braids just like me and you? These are the indigenous people of Colombia, America, Costa Rica, Mexico, Canada, Brazil, and the entire Bahamas.
Another common argument is based on looks, but most Black Americans don't look African. This misunderstands both history and biology. First, Africa is an immense continent of diverse peoples. Saying someone doesn't look African is as meaningless as saying someone doesn't look European. Africans range from light-skinned Tuaregs to dark-skinned Zulus to nearly every shade in between. Second, centuries of mixing have reshaped appearances. Genetics reveal the trend. On average, an African American is roughly 73% African and 24% European. That European ancestry often came from slaveholders or others, and it can influence physical traits, lighter skin, different hair texture, or facial features. Similarly, a small Native American or European lineage over generations can alter appearance. This is completely natural and expected. By contrast, an African immigrant today might be well over 90% African by DNA, so two Black individuals could look quite different while both being majority African genetically.
So real quick, I just needed to create this video because Africans keep commenting under my videos telling me that they are Hebrews. No, Africans are not Hebrews. Like, who lied to you? It seems like everyone knows Africans are cursed besides the Africans. You're not Hebrews. You're actually the descendants of Ham, the ones who have the curse. We Black people have experienced all kinds of hatred here in America because the white man was thinking that we were you. The white man has been thinking that we were the descendants of Ham, the ones who were cursed, when all along it's you, the Africans. You are cursed.
The logic that equates culture or blood with looks is a dangerous trap. It echoes the ugly history of colorism inside the Black community. Beginning in slavery times, lighter-skinned Blacks, often the children of masters, were sometimes given preferential treatment. This legacy was ingrained in social customs like the infamous paper bag test, where a person's skin tone was literally compared to a brown bag to determine acceptance in certain circles. This internal hierarchy, if you're darker than this, you're inferior, has hurt Black unity for generations. Using appearance to police identity is simply a modern echo of those practices. It creates jealousy and mistrust among Black people, say between an African American whose grandparents were sharecroppers and a Black immigrant from Jamaica who might look different to them. In truth, we must be careful. Appearance can never be a valid measure of one's roots or worth. As the poet Maya Angelou said of identity, it is not just blood or land, but the story we tell ourselves. In our case, that story should never be a weapon that another Black person is somehow less authentic.
Just a quick question. If we were actually the Native Americans, what would that change? Not a damn thing. We still facing systemic racism. We still having problems in the community, and y'all worrying about being Native Americans. I'ma hold your hand when I say this, my Black brother. It is okay to have African descent.
And I'm not gonna be around here trying to explain who we are, what we are. Y'all already know who we are. Y'all always trying to, key in with y'all slave masters so y'all can jump into our spot. You can't get our spot. Y'all never will be like us.
What's so bad about having African descent? My nigga, you're not Cherokee. Like, this whole FBA movement, I know I'm gonna get some hate, but bro, it's so stupid to me. We sitting here arguing about who African and who not. My nigga, they look at us the same way. This is exactly what they want to continue to divide us, bro. The more we argue with each other, we not arguing at the real goddamn, target.
In the end, the debate over origins is just one chapter in a much larger story. Whether we trace our blood to West Africa or by some miracle to American soil, the reality remains that Black people in America today share a common struggle. Systemic racism, economic inequality, police violence, and cultural erasure touch us all no matter our exact lineage. These are problems born of prejudice, not of genetics or geography. Focusing too much on who came from where can distract from the fight ahead. Internal divisions over color, class, or ethnicity have historically been a delight to those in the establishment who rule by keeping us divided. White supremacy has thrived by putting marginalized groups at odds. Poor whites versus Blacks, Asians versus Latinos, etc. The tragedy is that debates about ancestry serve the same function. When we consume conspiracy theories instead of organizing for common goals, the walls between us stay high. Rather than ridicule these beliefs or label them delusional, it may be kinder to see them as symptoms of deeper pain and longing. The desire for a clear origin story for roots and dignity comes from centuries of loss. People crave certainty when their history has been stolen or buried. They reach for myths when facts feel inadequate to hold the truth of their experience. Identity is not just blood or land, it is a story we tell ourselves about where we come from. For Black Americans, the truth of that story is painful and beautiful. Millions of our ancestors were torn from Africa, forced to build a life in an alien world, and then starved of history, language, and even a name. The survival of our community, our music, our faith, our resistance, is the real inheritance we share. The real challenge is not to fall for divisive myths, but to find unity in our actual history and common purpose. Our focus must be on lifting each other up, revealing injustices, and securing justice for all Black people, whether our roots trace to Ghana or to Cherokee Nation. By embracing truth together and building solidarity, we honor the legacy of our ancestors far more than any myth ever could.